Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much, Charisse. I mean, I know lots of people are still joining. Thank you all who have joined before, who probably had confused the time frame, etc. And I'm really honored to be joining this presentation, as Charisse mentioned. So again, today we'll be talking about better business branding in an integrated way. And I should say, I have to thank my team at Info who put together this lovely slide for me in line with our brand essence, or what theme and all of that theme that we have going for us. So I want to just move over to my first slide, which gives you an overview of what we'll be talking about. So today I want to focus on some key areas, including branding, it being much more than a look and feel. I want to also touch a little bit on the role that PR plays in your branding overall dynamics and why an integrated approach matters, as well as how you can crisis-proof your brand and some essentials that you can have in your brand toolkit. Now, I always like to find out who exactly I'm talking to. So if you could just drop in the chat some of the organizations that you're from, some of the countries that you are located in, that would really help me to feel a little bit more connected with you so I can tailor my presentation as I go along. In terms of some housekeeping as well, I think we will pause at the end of each section. I have 4 main sections I'm going to be taking you through, and we'll pause at the end of each section to take some questions. These you can throw in the chat. I think there's a raise hand feature as well that you can do to ask some of these questions. Just a little bit as well, as a qualifier, for those of you who may not know me, what exactly equips me to be making this presentation? So as Charisse mentioned briefly, I head up a company, Infinity Integrated Marketing Communications, or Infinity IMC for short. And we are an integrated marketing communications company that primarily uses communications for good across the Caribbean region. So I know lots of my audiences here aren't just based in one Caribbean country, so you will find as well that this conversation may be appealing to you. So we call ourselves your integrated communications champions across the Caribbean region. And there are several things that we do. So we do communications and marketing strategy development and execution. We do media relations, we do branding, content creation, social media management, corporate social responsibility, development communications, communications training, public speaking, media interviews, cultural awareness, and so much more. And we do events planning, of course. Now, some of the organizations we have worked with are places that you may be familiar with. A few of them are here on your screen. And for a very long time, I must admit, someone looks at our suite of organizations we have worked with, and they're like, oh, you've done stuff with the UN, you've done stuff with the EU, and all of these entities. And so in a sense, as I go along, I will speak to you about shifting gears with branding, because incidentally, at some points, this did not always work in our favor, because sometimes we'd have corporate entities who just always saw us as the international organization brand, so they would not approach us to implement certain things on their behalf, not knowing that the same value we deliver to these organizations, we similarly can deliver to corporate entities, small and medium enterprises, etc. And just to get that out of the way, a little bit about me, what brought me here and what really equips me and qualifies me to have this conversation with you. So I always walk into rooms and I say to people, I'm confident, inclusive, and passionate about using communications for good. So a huge part of that is based on the different things that have contributed to my own brand journey. Like, I started off being shy, and anyone who is registered for our upcoming public speaking and training session, I'll tell you the story behind that. And creating was a safe space for me because of skill sets that are linked to persuasion, or the art of effectively persuading. Then I studied at the bachelor's level communications and behavior change studies, and that equipped me with certain skill sets around strategy and psychology. Then I worked in an advertising agency, and that helped me in terms of niching down on brand look and feel, the color psychology, the different typography, all of that is included in the visual components. I work in government, and because of the volatility of the particular ministry I was in, that helped me hone certain crisis communication strategies that have become super important for the type of work we do. And much later on, I moved over into the development space, which is working with international organizations. I served as chairperson for the United Nations Communications Group. And that role has equipped me with positive changes. So, moving from a starting point, what do you want your audience to do? And then you're equipping them with the tools to respond accordingly. Most importantly, though, as a part of my brand ethos, my elder brother, he had epilepsy as a child growing up. And even though I was a younger one, I found that because I was a little bit more vocal, I kind of became the voice for him to kind of explain his illness to people. And so that is also a part of my brand journey, that I feel it important to use my voice to give a voice to the vulnerable and the voiceless. So just wanted to give you that as a little bit of context in terms of the different skill sets I would have amassed over the years and how that contributes to the presentation that I'm able to give you today. Now, what is branding? And I'm just going to take that off the screen just for a bit because I want to get a little bit interactive now. You can type in the chat. Maybe we'll take one or two persons explaining what you understand branding to mean. So great, I'm seeing some of the people in the chat. We have someone Jamaica, Entertainment Jamaica Growth Perspectives Limited. I'm from Croatia. I'm not seeing all the things in the chat. I'm from St. Kitts, I'm from St. Martin, I'm from Jamaica, I'm from Barbados, etc. So quite a diverse group attending this session. And all right, I'm not hearing yet what you think branding is, but I will just give everyone a little time for you to warm up. We're still not all that familiar with each other yet, but as you go along and as you feel moved, you can put your definitions in the chat. So I wanted to introduce two main definitions in terms of what branding is. So there's this one about the marketing practice of creating a name, symbol, or design that identifies and differentiates a product from other products. This, I think, most people are familiar with. Then there's also the definition that speaks to a brand as the set of expectations, memories, stories, and relationships that taken together account for a consumer's decision to choose one product or service over another. So I think, I don't remember where I heard this very succinct way of describing branding. It literally says, it's what your customers think or say about you when you aren't around. So, it just speaks to the lasting impact that you would have left to equip persons to say, okay, this is a reliable brand. It's a trustworthy brand. It is a fun brand. It's a family linked brand, etc. and so much more. And so the first thing I want to start off with is that branding is much more than a look and feel. And what this means is that for quite a while, we would have been exposed to brand being about your logo, right? It can include your consistent color palettes. So I know there's been a massive social media shift, and we now have very cute or very coordinated social media feeds. The color schemes are there, and it is all nice and well, and that is a part of branding, but not necessarily the full thing. For people here who are just starting out in their entrepreneurship journey, or people who are still on the fence, for example, yes, it is important in terms of consistent color palettes and even the types of color you select. So people who study any sort of color psychology will tell you that different colors mean very different things. For us at Infinity, we wanted to project the imagery of us being professional, but we also wanted to bring the imagery of us being calm. So even our shade of blue, it's not too dark, so we appear too rigid. And then also tone it down with a lighter sort of blue that gives you the calmness, reminds you of clouds, etc. And so there are several layers, and you may want to do some research, even if you've started with your logo and everything, to say, is my look and feel communicating what I want it to? A yellow, for example, is associated with sunshine and happiness, etc. Even within our brand colors, we try to incorporate a bit of that. You also want to think about fonts, because different fonts communicate different things. If you have cursive versus if you have something that's a little bit more rigid, and if you have something that's a little bit lighter. You have ultimately distinguishing marks such as your logos, your symbols, etc. And then you have your slogans, your taglines, which are a part of your brand voice. So I think for the most part, most of us know this. We associate branding with this in terms of my brand, how it looks. Right. So I have a little activity here for you. And looking at these imagery on the screen, what comes to mind? So for the first one here, it's safe to say it's highly recognizable. So for the first one here, anyone, you can just drop in the chat, what comes to mind when you see these different symbols on the screen here? What brands, what companies, what entities are you thinking about? And I see some things coming in the chat. Nike, Apple, etc. So fine, the symbols are speaking to you in terms of how to, what brands it is or what companies it is aligned with. But what are the emotions that come to mind when you see a Nike, for example? Someone looking at a Nike logo may think durability, may think reliability. Someone else may see it as aspirational because if you're wearing a Nike, it aligns with your just do it-ness. You have Coca-Cola, for example, which uses red, and you think about joy or happiness or passion or something related to that. But what do you think of when you see Coca-Cola? You may think of it as a fun brand. I know for me, each time I see a Coca-Cola label or brand, it brings back memories of Christmas because they tend to do all these family-centric ads, etc., around that time and bringing people together and the joy of giving, etc. We have MasterCard as well. Thank you so much for that, Clara. So MasterCard is there. And what comes to mind when you think of MasterCard? And you may be thinking, well, finances, you may be thinking of security. And Apple, what comes to mind when you think of Apple? Apple has done such an awesome job in terms of how they've marketed themselves and how they've branded themselves that I think Apple now has brand champions that they don't even need to pay because Apple users automatically try to convert anyone else who's not an Apple user. And trust me, I have been a diehard person. I had a Dell for the longest time and I wouldn't give it up for nothing. And I remember when I wanted to change my laptop and I was going to the market and then assessing, etc. And all the good things people said about Apple were things that started to try to convert me. And so today I'm presenting to you from an Apple device. So when branding is done effectively, it can in fact convert people. It can in fact create brand champions for you. These are people who are lobbying and speaking on your behalf even when it is unsolicited. And so this is where we all want to go to when we do better business branding and when we really get to a very effective point. So I'm going to jump over quickly in terms of branding being much more than a look and feel. And what this means is that if it is that you're someone, and I know there are people here probably as well, that your business specializes in branding. So, I would just say have an open mind throughout the conversation because there may be nuggets that you may pick up. In fact, I'll say to people that as a company that does marketing, communications, PR, etc., we are never averse to having external feedback because have you ever heard of the carpenter, for example, who don't have no furniture, or the shoemaker who never has any shoes? So you find sometimes that even when you're within an industry, you're more focused on helping others to streamline their brand or others to execute in a particular way. But then even from your perspective, you're not doing it internally. And so that's why sometimes, even as a company that specializes in branding, it's valuable to have an external feedback to see how well you're doing and if there are different things that you need to be focusing on. So here are some questions that you want to be asking yourself to move beyond seeing branding as just a look, right? How do people feel about your brand? I mean, like right here and now, ask yourself that question. How do people feel about your brand? What may surprise you is that many people don't know. We're doing a thing, we have the nice imagery, we have the logos, etc., and we're not necessarily aware of how different persons feel about your brand. And as I go along, I will tell you exactly how you can ensure that you're getting feedback and knowing exactly what is happening there. You also want to find out what makes you stand out from the competition. So we do brand consultations with small, medium, and large enterprises quite a number of times. And what stood out to me in some of these consultations is that you'll ask persons, so how familiar are you with the competition? What are they doing? And incidentally, in these consultations, people will say, well, I know who my competitors are, but I don't business about them. They're doing what they're doing, and I'm doing what I'm doing. And that was like a mind-blowing moment because how then, at what point can it become easy for your competitor to overthrow you? What may they be doing very differently in the market? Or in fact, how can you distinguish yourself in the market? So I'll tell you in Infinity's case, for example, clearly there are several marketing and communications companies out there, dime a dozen. However, we have niche down and leverage also the skills as well as members of the team. And so we highlight in many respects the development communication aspect of our business, which is aligned with several international organizations, which is aligned with many corporate social responsibility initiatives. And then that is supported by saying we can do the same branding, marketing, etc. for other corporate entities and small businesses. But you have to know your competition, because otherwise you're all going to be competing for the same slice of the pie, the same share of the market, when sometimes you can in fact carve out and create your own niche to tap into. So then really, how are you able to gauge how people feel about your brand? You know, are you using things in the online space, or are you having in-person sort of engagements to find this out? And what core values do you want to highlight through your brand? So this is important. I've often gone into spaces and I've asked people the question, is your brand more about you, or is it about the persons that you are serving? So you can probably just drop that in the chat, or if someone wants to take a go at that. Is branding more about you, or is it about the persons that you're serving? And I dare say it's a mix of both, because often great business ideas start because someone got a vision or someone saw a problem that they want to find a solution for. And in so doing that, they come up with this great idea to say, I want to do this, and ultimately I want to make money doing it, right? But then somewhere along the way, you need to, as the definition said at the start, position yourself in such a way that someone chooses your brand, your product consistently over another. And so to make that transition, it from being about you to being about the customers that you are serving. And I will talk a little bit more in terms of narrowing down on the customers and ensuring that with your branding, you're meeting their needs. And so that is one thing that you want to start to think through, your core values, not just in terms of what drove you to start the business, but in terms of who you're serving and what value you're bringing to them. Which brings us to the other question of why should people choose you? And really, how do they benefit from choosing you? So you'd have probably heard that people often buy solutions and they don't necessarily buy your products, right? Or people will buy from people who they know, like, and trust. So you want to get to that position that even in a very competitive marketplace, you're standing out as the person who your audience know, who they like, because again of your brand story, and you sharing that with them, and I'll touch a little bit more on that as I go along, and who they trust. Often the trust comes from interacting and engaging with your brand, having a positive experience, which motivates them to engage further. So a neat little trick, incidentally, I learned this in media school, but I find it cuts across so many different areas, is that in assessing your brand and moving it beyond just being a look, is to start with your 5 W's and your H. And the 5 W's being your who, your what, your when, your where, your why, and your how. So let's look at this from an example. I could say who, Infinity Integrated Communications, does what? We deliver integrated marketing solutions across the Caribbean region. When do we do this? Pretty much all the time, because there are some businesses that are seasonal, for example. So, you know, we do it around the clock, or business hours, when maybe 9 to 5, but we do planning and executions outside of that frame. Where do we do this? Our statement is clear. We do this across the Caribbean region. And then why are we doing this? One, because we see the importance of an integrated approach to helping brands to be building, to helping to give the vulnerable and the voiceless a voice, and to really be working towards making the world a better place. And then in terms of how we do this, these are all the service offerings that are included in that, whether it is training programs, whether it is a case that we're doing a strategy and we're implementing, saying whether it is an event, whether it's a public relations campaign, whether it is a visual assets that are communicating all of what you do. So I think this is a pretty handy thing that just about every business, and maybe you can jot this down somewhere, because at some point I'd love to hear from the different groups that are here in terms of how you're using the 5 W's and H to kind of streamline and to even get a better understanding of your brand. And trust me, this is not something you just do to say, oh, well, I've already gone through the process. You can go through the process as many times as possible. You can look back at the 5 Ws and the Hs and retail or recalibrate your brand as is necessary. And I'll give you an example of how this is important. As I shared earlier, I shared all of these organizations that we have worked with. And so for a long time, as I said, we became known as the international organization company. And I had friends in corporate who were implementing events or they were doing corporate social responsibility initiatives, but they would not call an Infinity because our branding had sort of branded us outside of that segment of the market. So what did we do? We went back in as a team, we had a brainstorming session, and we looked back to say, what other segment of the market is it that we hope to attract? And how is it that we are branding and positioning ourselves to assist those persons? And so we started doing lots more in terms of directly targeting those people. So, sometimes, as I say, you have to just go back through the paces and go back, start from square one to really understand your brand so that you're in a better position to communicate your brand with others, right? I think about it as it's a chicken and egg sort of vibe. You love the color yellow and you say, you know what, I am going to sell some water. And I want my water brand to have a lovely yellow logo, and that's you. And why are you choosing yellow? Because I'm a happy, sunshiny person, and I want my brand to scream happiness. And then you do all of your branded assets, etc. It's not resonating with your audience. And so you can go back to your 5 Ws and H to say, who am I serving? How do I want to serve them, etc. Get your feedback from them on the colors, what it is saying to them, if it is resonating, etc. And then you can go back throughout the process again. So again, as I said, this is something you can do at several stages and can always keep handy. Another complementary piece to this would be your SWOT analysis. So, that's your strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And in terms of several of the questions I would have raised here, this gives you a foothold in terms of what you're doing right. What are some of the areas that need to be improved? What are some segments of the market that you probably have not been tapping into? In the example I gave, we were leaving money on the table literally by not having strategic elements that were aligned with the small and medium enterprise section of the market, but we had to fix that. So we went back and tried to figure out how to address that situation. So again, as well, you want to be looking at your competitive advantage. So the opportunities section really allows you to assess that, the market. What are the opportunities there? What are things that you can do in? And then the threats is also worth looking at because it helps you to anticipate things that may go wrong, that may affect your line of business, or may affect how you are perceived. And when we get to crisis proof in your brand, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And so all of this together helps you to really have what I'd like to call the skeleton, the background, the framework of your brand, even before you get to the point of communicating about it. Importantly, and I touched on this while speaking generally, is that research and researching about your brand is super important. And you want to do your audience analysis. The first thing I will say is you can't reach everybody. You cannot have everybody as your target audience. And so you will hear people talk about having an ideal audience, and you really need to be zoning down on that. Who is your ideal audience? You think about the examples we had before, and you may say, well, Nike's targeting everybody because everybody can wear sneakers. In truth, if you really zone in on Nike's brand philosophy and its vision, etc., one, its ideal customers are people at a certain price point, people who are willing to purchase sneakers at a particular price point. There's also some aspirational components in terms of what comes to mind when someone sees you in a Nike or the feeling that you get from it. There's also people who want something that they will say it's going to last them for a very long time. So in many respects, we will look at things and we say, oh, we're targeting everybody, but that's not the situation. So you need to really start to look at your audiences and say, who exactly am I targeting and why am I targeting them? Because frankly, sometimes too, we are targeting wrong people because in attempting to do market analysis, we look and say, oh, everybody doing this now, so let me do it as well. But the truth is, the product you're offering, that's not the best way to be positioning it to that particular target audience. I will say, for example, that even in our business, one line of our business we don't necessarily need to advertise for, because we tend to get that business through referrals and previous situations where we did an awesome job, and so someone else feels motivated to say, hey, you know, this company had done this, this organization had done this, here is something that you can do. So in audience analysis, critical. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the integrated approach. You want to be doing your competitor analysis, which I spoke about a little bit. What is your competition doing, and what are they doing excellently, or what are they doing poorly? So you can look at the things they're doing excellently, and you can get spin-offs or ideas from that. And then you can also look at what they're doing poorly and see that as an opportunity to serve that section of the market or to correct the errors that they have. And so you also want to be looking at research as process and outcome research. And the process research, literally as it says, it's throughout the process. So as I started with the 5 W's and the H, you want to start that at the beginning of the process. You don't want to wait until you're done doing all your brand collaterals and realize it does not resonate with anyone. And so with process research, you have this grand idea. You're going to design a logo. You get your graphic designer, you talk through the process with them and say, this is what I want, this is what I wanted to communicate. And from the draft stage, you can start to get feedback. What do you think about when you see this logo? What comes to mind? Of course, we have to bear in mind that you have abstract logos that really don't show you or tell you much about an entity, but then you have some logos with components that are kind of explaining to you what an organization does. So you want to include that completely throughout your branding in terms of as you go along the process, you have done your brand materials, you are now looking at your vision, you're looking at your mission statement, etc. You're looking at your audience that you're serving, and you are constantly including in that process. So I'll tell you about one brand we were doing something for. It was a new product that was being launched in the market. They were a US-based company and they wanted to introduce some insurance products into the local market. We clearly had to be doing process research to find out, you know, in terms of the look and feel, the color palette, how people would feel about a new player in the market, what are some of the things that would convince them. And so all of this was fed into the branding approach that was taken in that instance. And, you know, and outcome research now is that at the end, you have launched your products and you have launched your services, and you're now getting general feedback from persons. Again, is this resonating? Is it working? Are there things we need to tweak, etc.? And customer and internal feedback. So the process and outcome research I spoke about does in fact encapsulate some of this, but internal feedback is key. If you're anyone here who has a team yet, that is super important. I think sometimes we think, and we may think our team is not within our target audience, but they do have valid ideas. Team members are also customers. And if you're an internal person right now, maybe a family member, or it may be yourself only doing this, you know, you can ask some friends who are likely to use the service and you can get some internal feedback before you go far and wide. So you want to research, and if you do your search one time, you want to research, because you may have done research 3 years ago and positioned your brand in a particular way and communicated it to people to say, this is what I'm doing. But after you have done your research, you've found that you need to kind of modify what you're doing, and which is why I said not just research, but you're going to research again, as in do a search over to say, all right, is this serving the market in the way that I want it to? So I will pause at this particular point to see if there are any specific questions, because one of the things I'm trying to do is to set the pace in terms of the background, the skeleton, the foundation for your branding. So if there are any questions, please feel free to drop it in the chat. Yes, I think Hendrickson had said earlier that branding is distinguishing yourself from others. That's correct. So, you know, we talk about branding a lot, and we're talking about it in terms of business and organizations, but in truth, business is also about you, the proprietor, the entrepreneur, your team that is interacting with the public. That's all feeds in your brand ethos as well, and the perceptions that people will have of your brand. So if there are no further questions, I will move over into how something such as effective PR can be aligned with your brand efforts. So really this section, we speak about how public relations helps you to position your brand and to evoke the feelings that you desire, right? Now, I'm checking to see if there's anyone. No, that's not a question. So what is public relations? It is a strategic communications process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. And this is from the Public Relations Society of America. And as you will see there, strategic is a word worth noting. Communication process is a phrase worth noting. And building mutually beneficial relationships is another between organizations and their publics. And publics in this sense means your audience, who you're talking to. So you'll see how it is all adding up. We've touched a little bit on your audience analysis, finding out who your brand is being directed at, and really now going into, you have the nice graphics, you have the look and feel. What are different layers that you can use to connect with your brand, to get to what our definition said at the start, to have people consistently choose you over all other products or services. And PR can be used for so many different things. As Forbes, there's this Forbes article that referred to how it can be used to protect, to enhance, or to build reputations through the media, social media, or self-produced communications. And you're probably wondering why I'm bringing this into a branding conversation. But again, as I said, we have moved beyond thinking of just branding as your logo and your slogans and your tagline. It's about positioning, so you get to a point of, how am I being presented, or how am I being perceived, or what reputation am I building within the marketplace? And in particular, again, in some of our consultations with small businesses, as I've learned as well, is that they will have the social media. They're doing stuff on social media. They have the nice color tones, etc. They're doing on-the-ground marketing, in fact, right? And they're even sponsoring some stuff. And you will say to them, oh, a key thing that you can do to complement your efforts would be to invest in public relations. And we've heard persons say, oh no, we don't really need that right now because we're doing ads, we have paid for an outside broadcast, or we paid for an ad here and there, etc. And so some key distinctions in terms of brand building is just getting to a point of understanding the real value that public relations does for you. And I mean, one of the most notable one is that advertising is paid, often paid, whereas public relations is not paid. Now I have to make a distinction here, because when you say this to people sometimes, they come to the company and say, oh, but yes, a PR is not paid. So certainly you're paying the practitioner for the public relations support. However, you're not paying the media entity to carry your story or to give you an interview or to package your content in a particular way. And I love to make this distinction because trained communicators know that, again, it is about the positioning and what you're doing with the brand. Because we have what we call a pitch that we do to these media entities. And in our pitch, again, it aligns with your brand ethos, your brand guide, your brand values, etc. So if I go to an editor and I'm saying, oh, there's this company and they're making drinks, and why should you do an interview about them? Or why should you give them a feature when you would just ask them to do an ad? Oh, the key distinction with this company is that they're making healthy lifestyle juices. And even if they're not making healthy lifestyle juices, something else I may pitch to a media house to say, oh, and did you know that they're running a special promotion? So a percentage of everything that they sell will go towards some social cause or some social initiative. And by using that, I can pitch it in such a way that an editor now becomes interested to say, well, here's a point where I would be open to hearing a little bit more about this. Or it could be that you're not giving anything to any cause, but it could be that the pitch is that here it is, I have an entrepreneur that has a successful story in terms of they've moved beyond certain struggles and challenges, and they have certain key tips that they would love to present to other entrepreneurs to help them to grow. And so that creates an opportunity. And when we create it that way, a key thing as a part of the process as well, in terms of communicating in line with your brand ethos, by using public relations is that you lead with the value that you're adding or the newsworthy story, and then of course you can tag it on. You're going to get brand mention because chances are the media house is going to say the organization you're from. They're going to chances ask you a little bit about what you do, but the bulk of the feature will be about the real newsworthy topic. And then just some other things on the screen, advertising. I mean, people, we think they're smart. They know when you're just literally trying to sell them something. So when you do an advertising as a part of your brand building activity, it sometimes screams ad. You know, people don't expect you to tell them the truth. You're going to tell them your product is the best in the market, or you're going to tell them that, you know, nobody does it better, or all of these things, when truth is sometimes it's not proven. Whereas if an editor, it is perceived that if an editor takes the time to run a story about you or about your product, or if you're in a situation where not hard selling the product, that it is a little bit more credible. So, you know, you want to think about that in terms of your brand as well. And I always say to people, look to the bigger brands. They don't just go and do their color schemes, etc. They're integrating all of these into the process to ensure that the things that people or the themes that they want to be positioning in their target audience's mind, it's there. So it's building loyalty, it's building admiration, it is building trust. And you know, it is focused on awareness, and public relations in particular has a longer term goal. So you want to be thinking as you scale and grow to integrate public relations as a part of your brand building, as a part of positioning all of the things that you would have established from the foundation stage in terms of what makes your company unique, what you're bringing to the market, what value you're adding. And you can use public relations to communicate this to your target audiences so that they then have a positive perception of your brand. And without even realizing it, they start to say to others, oh, you know, this is a reliable brand. This is a friendly brand. This is a socially acceptable brand. Or, you know, this is something that if you're somebody who is church or whatever, you can say, oh, this is a brand who is aligned with the values of the church, etc. And so public relations in particular can help you to build out on that. So a little bit in terms of PR and just planning ahead is that you can think through about how you want to not just include it, but how you can use it to help you to supersize. And I specifically include in this slide because noting how diverse our audience is here. And if you think about it, you started your branding process and you have your brand collaterals, etc. And again, based on all of what I've just said about what public relations can do for your brand in terms of building the credibility, building the trust, etc., it's also important if you're trying to supersize your brand, if you're expanding into other markets, if you're reaching new audiences, public relations can in fact help you to tap into those spaces. So your press releases, your media events for when you're announcing certain things, your sponsorships, your community involvement, your thought leadership, whether it is that you are doing a blog post, whether it is you are contributing to a column, whether it is that you are submitting a letter to the editor. You know, there are so many different layers. And again, tying back to your brand ethos. This is why at Infinity, for example, as I said, we do offer integrated communication solutions across the Caribbean region. But one of the things we do, if we set up an interview for you, we don't just send you there to just go and talk. You know, a key thing we do is that we have those guiding points, which again, tie back to your brand, your ethos, your values, etc. What are the things that you need to communicate in the interview? So you may be talking, someone may call you, for example, and you're in the tech space and someone calls you to give some feedback on what you think about trends and the direction in which they're going. And so in that brief that we would have communicated, we would have created for you, there would have been tips there in terms of here are some key points you want to be communicating that again ties back to what is your value differentiation, why should persons choose you, etc. And it can be done in very subtle ways, but at the end of the day, it's a guiding point for you to use to ensure that when you go onto any platform and when you speak in any sort of space, you're consistently on brand, you're being true to all of the things that you would have established using the 5 W's and the H's to begin with. So are there any questions at all from this section before I move on?
I have a question, Shanoy.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. It's so interesting that you made a distinction between public relations and ads, right? On the public relations side of it, though, how important is selecting your publicist in order to get the traction that's needed?
Oh, great. Thank you so much for that question, Claire. Wow. So it's super important. And I think a huge mistake many businesses make is that they think well, let's use the general term communications. People just think anybody can do it. And in a sense, everybody can communicate. I mean, we have a mouth, we have a voice, etc., but not everyone can do it effectively. And so I will say to people all the time that public relations is, or the general communications industry, it is a skilled area. There are things that people who are publicists or people who are within the space know in terms of how to position you in such a way that people start to see you as an authority or start to see you as the best authority. So selecting the right publicist is super important because you also want a brand or a publicist that's going to be not just understanding your brand, but it's going to be putting you onto the best places for your brand. So let's look at it this way. You have publicists who work in the entertainment industry, or they may work in the music industry, etc. You may have publicists who niche in fintech. You may have publicists that focus on general affairs, who focus on business, etc. If you are someone who is in the entertainment sector, you can in fact get a little bit more value from someone who specializes in entertainment PR or within that industry. Because what public relations is about is also building a database of connections. With us at Infinity, however, we have several beats that we focus on. So we're not restricted in that way. So if you're someone who is focused on business, and we know we're doing this across the Caribbean, it becomes our business to know, to understand the different players that are in the space. What media house is likely to carry a business article in Jamaica versus in Grenada versus in Guyana versus in St. Kitts? And so this becomes important as well, sometimes in finding out from the persons who you're engaging with, do you specify or do you focus on this particular area? And that can add some value to you in ensuring that you're selecting someone who knows the market. Because again, as I said, people say, oh yeah, but anybody can do it. But I will tell you from our industry as well, there are things that we're privy to. We have to study things like the All Media Survey. We have to understand, for example, which media house is more appealing to persons who would be in the youth demographic versus the female demographic, the male demographic, the sports demographic, and we could just go on and on into infinity, pun intended. So, but this is just something that your publicist really needs to understand what they're doing. They need to understand the industry in which you're operating as well. I mean, of course, they're going to ask the scoping questions and get to understand your industry, but importantly, they can add real value by being very familiar with the spaces and the players within that market so they can help to position you. And I just wanted to add as well that with the shift from not just traditional media, your publicist would know maybe certain blogs that you have never heard of that you can contribute a piece to and be seen as a thought leader. Your publicist may also be in a position to know of, say you're someone who's looking to expand into Atlanta. And then I could say to you, oh, I could put you onto the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce so you can do a presentation there. And through that presentation, you can leverage that further to expand your brand into a new market. So super awesome question, Claire. And just, these are just guiding questions you ask. You know your niche. Again, though, you really have to get down and know what you're offering and what you're about. And so when you go scouting, you're asking the person who's going to represent you in that way, are you familiar with my industry? What are some of the things that you think you could do for me? So thank you for that. Is there anything else before I move on? All right. I can't believe I've been talking.
There's a question in the chat, Shanoy. Can you speak to the difference between CSR and community involvement? This is from Eva Tumbling.
All right, great. Thank you so much for that. So CSR, as many people would be familiar, stands for Corporate Social Responsibility. And corporate social responsibility is a streamlined ways in which many corporate entities, they may give back to a particular group. They may sponsor something as it relates to a school program, they may fund a school block, they may do a school feeding program, they may buy gears, etc., for students, etc. And that is seen as CSR, and then they leverage this, they get visibility from it, they get the nice write-up, they put content on their social media, they get tax write-offs in some instances as well, because many charitable things, you can in fact see that as a tax write-off. And so corporate social responsibility focuses on that at the broader level. I think the key differential between corporate social responsibility and community involvement is that they aren't necessarily one and the same, because an entity can literally come, hand over a check to a school, and that becomes a one-off activity, right? Whereas community involvement goes a little bit deeper. And I love this question because a lot of what we do with lots of our international organizations, it goes deeper. We talk a lot about taking a development approach to initiatives that we're doing. And so we have been advocating a lot of times that, lots of CSR initiative, it really should be longer term. It should be about building relationships. It is about positioning yourself so that people see you as a part of their community. So CSR can in fact morph into being community involvement based on how long-term the goals are, or it can literally just be a one drop, and you go, you hand over something, you get your visibility from that, but there's no leverage, there's no connection with the community. You're not top of their mind if someone says, okay, if you were to nominate someone for community involvement, who is someone that you would nominate for that? So corporate social responsibility can include or can become community involvement, but I think the key difference with community involvement is the longer term, is being in the longer haul, it is building the relationships and not just having a stop and go approach to that. All right, are there any further questions? All right, not at this time. So I will just hop over a bit to the other section. Robin is asking a question. Hi, Shanoy, from where you stand, when does CSR become vulgar? All right, so without calling names, I recall, for example, there was a promotion I'd seen floating around on my timeline, and it was interesting because there were people who were commending the entity and saying, oh, this was genius. This is a genius move, etc. And the initiative was linked to something having to do with, I'll just call them a vulnerable group without saying too much more. But say, let's just think about it that you have, I don't want to get into much troubles without saying the exact thing, but let's say you have a vulnerable group. Say you have rural women and girls, right? And they're there and they need opportunities to go back to school and to get a livelihood, etc. And a brand may go into the community for a day and say, oh, we are going to open a community car wash for the day. And there's a big write-up about doing a community car wash, and they get quite a few of the ladies from the community and everybody in wet t-shirt, and it is branded with the company's name and logo. And someone in the marketing department says, oh, this is awesome, because guess what? We're giving all these ladies $5,000 for the day, and they're getting an opportunity to earn. But you're actually taking advantage of the person's vulnerabilities, right? And for persons who are familiar with the development communication and being in that space, we have what we call a do no harm approach. And so if an intervention that you somehow sat down and thought about to say, this is going to help this community for a day, but how is it helping the ladies' self-esteem if they're out there in wet t-shirt, etc., washing that sort of thing with your branding emblazoned across it? And it may seem to some people to be innovative, etc., but certainly from a development perspective, that would be something that is doing far less to empower and engage and far more to denigrate and to, disenfranchise the persons that are there. So Robin says, I work in development communications, and so my lenses tend to pick up these instances, which is exactly the case, Robin. I didn't give the exact scenario I wanted, but when I saw what that entity did, my development communications background literally came into the fore and said, oh, if I were that entity, I would have gone and enrolled those ladies in a skills training program, which is a longer term. You're not just giving a man a fish, you're teaching him how to fish, etc. So in that case, that could be one way that CSR becomes vulgar, when with all good intentions, the brand is out there, they're doing an activity, they're getting the visibility, but it is also not positively benefiting the person. There may be a short-term benefit that can even have some longer term consequences. I see Glacia here saying Grace Kennedy is a great example of being good corporate citizens. Speaking of Grace Kennedy, I had them to mention on a previous slide because we were doing a research. So there was a campaign we wanted to roll out, and we were doing this across different Caribbean countries. And the research included interviewing people from different countries, etc. Because one of the things we know that you can't just create a campaign in Jamaica and say, oh, it's going to work in Trinidad, or it's going to work in Barbados, or St. Lucia, etc., or St. Martin. And so we had to be tailoring that campaign to meet different segments of the market. And we were doing some research in terms of what stands out as good corporate goodwill or good corporate structures in different countries. And as I saw the reference to Grace Kennedy, it was interesting because in the male groups, when we were doing the focus group research, the men said, oh, Grace Kennedy is a good example because they sponsor, I think, schoolboys football, yes. So I think they said that. And then someone else, interestingly, in the female group, that did not come up at all. So again, I just wanted to use that example in terms of how different segment of your audiences may respond to different things. Certainly for the males, this is what makes them a good corporate entity versus for the females. It was not even something that popped up. The females chose a completely different company based on how it is aligned with their needs. And Candice is saying, I think CSR can become vulgar when the focus is more on marketing the business than actually helping the people. So great, that's a very succinct way to put it, Candice. And for those of you who, as I say, have any sort of development or behavior change background, then you would see the clear difference in terms of how CSR can become exploitatory when it isn't focused on changing any behavior, just going out for the day and getting the visibility aligned with that. So I will just hop over a bit. Thank you so much for those questions. So you can keep them coming as we go along. So why does an integrated approach matter? I think in some respects I would have been touching on this, but I often ask the question, if you have an awesome logo and you have an awesome color and you have all of your vision and mission statement and everything down pat and no one knows about it, does it help you to move the needle with selling your products and services? So it's almost like if a tree drops in the forest but no one hears the sound, did it fall, right? And so this is why we ask the question, why does an integrated approach matter towards your branding? And I won't even go into the complexities. I have seen lots of conversations in the space, people talking about branding versus marketing versus PR and advertising, and where all of that falls. And I think lots of the times we get into the space of thinking of them as warring fractions, being in opposition to each other, when in truth, they should all be working together. And so a little bit in terms of why the integrated approach matters is that the integrated way, or the IMC way, is a process of unifying a brand's messaging to make it consistent across all media that the brand uses to reach its target audience. It's a strategic approach that guides communication and tactics used across all of your different channels. So when somebody is on brand, it's like they don't go out of character. There's a key thing that they want to position themselves. What is the one thing that I want to be known for? I want to be known as a person who is using communications for good. And that communications for good can take several different formats. For international organizations, it can mean implementing a behavior change campaign around safe sex. It can mean helping farmers to do better farming practices to increase their yields. It can mean for a corporate entity to launch a scholarship program or to give back in a consistent way in a community. For a small business, it can mean just getting out of the starting blocks and trying to get a better understanding of how they can effectively communicate across all platforms. But really, with the integrated approach, you start back where we began with the brand to say, what do you want to be known for? What is going to be your key differential? But then, how can you maximize how this is communicated? And this is how the integrated marketing communications approach comes in. Because again, it is about positioning yourself across different platforms. So I give you an example. Say I'm here doing this Branson Centre presentation. I've already told you about my company, about myself and what we're about. I can then package the same messaging and I can put a blog post on my website, or I can post the article or a link to snippets from the video on my website. I can then also create a carousel to share on my social media platform. I can go and do an interview that builds off this. And in the interview, I'm talking about why the integrated approach matters for better business branding. And throughout that, there's a consistent thread of a singular unifying message. You're doing an interview, your interview guide tells you that these are a few things that you need to be working through. So, you know, in many ways, I've heard sections of the market again saying, oh, is it branding versus marketing, etc. Is it sales? Sales even gets in the conversation. Ultimately, for most people, the end goal is sales. And then your brand building, your marketing, your communications, they all work together to get you to that point of one, keeping your brand front and center, two, effectively connecting with your target audiences, and three, helping them to consistently and confidently choose your product or service every single time. So, as I mentioned a little bit, it's all interconnected. So effective brand building can be most effective when you take multiple approaches. And I know as a small business, you know, as an entrepreneur who's just starting out, you may not always have the assets to do everything at once. And so this is why I encourage testing and measuring different components. You will see, for example, you run a full social marketing campaign, but nobody's buying your product, right? Again, it may be that you're marketing to the wrong audience, but it may also be that your audience isn't there. You know, they're not on social media. And I will tell you that for a while, before we delved into small and medium enterprises, we weren't so sure we should be marketing our services on Instagram, for example, because the truth is most of our clientele were more likely to be on a LinkedIn, for example. But of course, in expanding to a segment of the market and in expanding the product line in terms of training programs, etc., you found that those were people who would be on the Instagram, for example, who would be on the Facebook, who would be on Twitter, etc. So again, you kind of really want to niche down in trying different approaches. It's really about where your persons are. And I say this to say that sometimes you don't need a social media campaign. What you may need is to be on the ground and to be interacting with people in a face-to-face sort of way. And I give you an example that, you know, we were called in on a project towards the latter end. Someone else had implemented, lots of money was spent, nice videos were done. They were placed on TV, and this was being done to target farmers. Now, when we went in and we were starting to assess how impactful or effective the campaign was, no farmer we spoke to knew of the program, have ever listened to the program, have ever interacted with the program, or knew anyone else who had. And so, you know, just by digging, it was like, when did you place these ads that were done? The ads were being placed around what is prime time, but it was midday prime time. So it was when the news, after the news in the midday, and then it came right after that, which in truth is prime for some audiences, but for audiences that are watching TV during that time. Now, if anybody bothered to do any research, they know that the average farmer isn't sitting at a desk somewhere or at home even watching television. The farmers themselves were telling you, well, I leave home early. I likely pack lunch to take with me. I don't have any reason to go back home. If you want to communicate with me, radio is your best bet, because chances are I will either listen to it on my phone or I'll walk with my little radio and I'm listening to stuff while I work. So these are all things that you want to think through. Ever so often as well, I will go back to the university and I will sit on presentation panels where people are talking about brand activities that they're doing. And someone will say, oh, you know, I want to do a community fair to raise awareness on so and so. And yet, in terms of their marketing strategies, they say, oh, I'm going to do some radio ads, I'm going to do some TV ads, etc. And my question is always, why? Who are you trying to reach in that space? You have a very localized audience. And unless it is that you're using a community radio station that is aligned with that particular market, the best bet in that instance was to do something like a community town hall, a community meeting, have probably posters at strategic locations. You know, so it's really these things we want to be thinking through and being mindful in doing our market analysis, that it's not everything that we see our competitors do will be important for the segments of the market that we are serving. right? So just let that sink in a little bit again, that not everything we see others do would be relevant to the persons that we are trying to reach out to. And again, it goes back to the 5 W's and the H's I started out with. Your who, your what, your when, where, why, and your how, and who you're really targeting. You know, who are these people? Where are they located? How do they communicate? What is the best way to reach them? What are their thoughts on certain things? You know, are they people who are swayed by a price point? Are they more swayed by quality? Are they people looking for luxury brands? Or are they people who just need a footing to get started? And so all of that helps you in terms of making this decision, in terms of the approaches that you're using. And you also want to be looking, as I said, your designs or branding, your internal and external medium. And this is something to consider as well, because I know there are companies here on this call that may say to persons, oh, we offer branding services. And I often say, when you say you offer branding services, what exactly that means, because many of the times you go into the spaces and designs or the graphics components are, you know, they're equated with branding as an overall discipline. And yes, it is a part of it. Your signage that you put outside of your building, your templates that you're using on social media, your website and what that looks like, your t-shirt, your logos, your letterheads, your business cards, etc. Those are all a part of it, but there can be a value added element if you're looking at ways to integrate. So what I've seen lots of companies that initially position themselves as being a brand management company do as well is that they forge alliances with like a marketing communications company, and that way they're able to deliver to their customers a full 360 as they go along, because they're testing and measuring the social media campaign and say, this segment of your market isn't really responding to social media. Maybe we should try something on the ground, or maybe we should look at a little bit of public relations that's targeted and direct, etc. And again, in terms of public relations, it's about creating the opportunities. As someone asks about community engagement, sometimes it is literally going back into a community and giving back. You know, people have supported you over the years. It now is meaningful for them to hear that you are coming to do something, even if it's not in their community, for another community. So these are some of the ways. And I wanted to touch a little bit as well in terms of just keeping it interconnected. It's also about you. Who is the face of your brand? And are you representing all of the things that you established before? Your who, what, when, where, why, etc. It is about, do you look the part? If you are going to be saying that you're an affluent brand and you know you're selling luxury products, etc., then you probably want your spokesperson to be communicating accordingly. For example, I may go into spaces and I offer public speaking and media interviews training, but I need to sound like I actually know how to speak. And so these are all different dynamics you want to think about. So more and more as you build your brand, I know some of us were shy, we're reserved. Trust me, I used to be shy as well. But you want to be thinking, who is speaking on behalf of your brand, and are they aligned with the values and the core themes that you want to be communicating? And in line with that as well, you know, I, for one, like I never really wanted to be the front of the business at one point. I would always argue with my team to say, guys, I don't have to be on every flyer. I don't need to be on any poster. And I'd use the examples of well-known business persons I know, and I say, you don't see this person from this company on everything, which isn't always true. The truth is many of these companies can now afford to pay someone to be their marketing person to speak on behalf of the brand, or their communications person to speak on behalf of the brand. But if it is that you are the person who is granted this opportunity to speak on behalf of your brand, you want to leverage that opportunity, and you want to ensure that you're being the very best version of yourself when you're doing this. Shameless plug, Infinity is hosting a public speaking and media interview session on the 29th of September. And so for anyone who has any reservations, you know, we target lots of people who are in the business space who want to speak on behalf of their brand, but they're afraid to do so. And so, you know, we have a journalist come in and we do live training sessions. So if there's anyone here who's interested in that, just for you, I will give you a 15% off if you complete that registration form and indicate that you learned about this via Branson. So just wanted to mention that. And again, as a part of the brand continuity is that you want to ensure that you are looking at your internal and your external medium in your interconnected way. And when I say internal and external medium, internally, You have had brand fallout sometimes because something is being introduced to the market, and you may have staff members who know of this after it has been disseminated. And that's a big no-no, because as I say, you want the persons inside to think about it, that I'm just checking the time. So, you want the persons who are inside to also be your brand champions, your brand cheerleaders, etc. And they're talking good about your company. Because can you imagine you go out there and you have the best brand imagery, etc., and then you have your staff members talking bad about the company and brand. So, you want to look at the internal and external communications, the internal and external branding, bringing your persons on board as brand champions before you go external. And I'm going to hop right over. If there are questions you have about that part, you can hold them in the chat, because I kind of want to just stick to the time a bit. I will go to this and then I can take your questions. Crisis proof in your brand. So I've talked a lot about what you are supposed to be doing, the process you're supposed to be going through, what you want your brand to look like, what you want your brand to sound like, the values you want to be communicating. But say you have done all of that. You've built an attractive and memorable brand, you're connected with your audiences, then disaster strikes. And the disaster can be something that, say you make natural hair products and you order some of your raw materials from a vendor who may be local or overseas. But within that batch of product, there is a tainted situation, people start complaining, their scalp scratching them, people hair falling out, etc. Disaster strikes. Right? And this isn't something you could necessarily have foreseen. Or the disaster could be the COVID-19 pandemic. And you had all grand plans to grow your business and to scale, etc. Then you have production woes, etc. And you're not able to get the products that you want to be distributing in the different spaces and places, right? So you want to be looking at that and say, yes, I've done all the work, but what if something happens? And so in terms of crisis proof in your brand, these are some key things that you need for your brand toolkit. So the first thing that we often recommend is that you do a brand communications audit. And what this is that it allows you to get an external look at your brand. And as I say, even for people here who are doing branding, I'd recommend that as something that you want to look into. For us as a company as well, the external feedback is super important, because it helps us to recognize if we are communicating in the way that we think we are. Because lots of times we do consultations with people and they say, oh, we do this. And they think that they're communicating this with their audience, when in reality, the audience does not get that at all. It may be the wording on a brochure somewhere. It may be a social media bio that is not describing the different things that you want it to be describing. It can literally be about the words that are there on the page, or even just the order in which they're being presented. It can be you going to do an interview and you're not communicating key points that you think in your head, this is what my business is about. But when you go into that space, you're not saying all of these things. So in your brand toolkit, it is sometimes recommended to do a brand communications audit, which allows you to have an external look at your brand to see, are you hitting the targets, etc. There are some ways you can do this internally. You can look at it to say, who am I trying to reach? Have I been able to reach them? What has the feedback been like? Do I have a mechanism for capturing the feedback, right? Then you also want to look at what we call a crisis strategy. And I have it as crisis communication strategy, but really it's a crisis brand communication strategy. And literally this anticipates that things can go badly and what you should do in case they do. So in a crisis, we tend to panic. It's human, it's a natural thing to do. But when you plan ahead and you're doing a crisis communication strategy, you start to ask yourself, within my industry, what could possibly go wrong? And you won't ever capture every possible scenario, but trust me, as a team, when you start to think through, then you start to say, oh, yeah, I'm a healthy juice company. And what if, people are saying, oh, my product is making them fatter or something of sorts. So you start to think through the different things that are there and what are some of the responses. So your crisis brand comm strategy is not just identifying the problems, but looking at potential solutions for all of these. And you're going to document that, you're going to keep that on file. You're going to revisit ever so often so that if the crisis does hit, you already have a reference point. And, you think about it with the Queen's passing the other day, we have what we call a holding statement. And these are the statements. That statement was drawn up a long time ago, and I'm sure there are several variations. If the Queen gets sick or any other member of the royal family, there's a statement that is already typed up somewhere that can be disseminated quickly to different networks. So again, you would have had your brand collaterals. You want to ensure you have your holding statements prepared on a professional letterhead so you can disseminate that promptly to your different audiences, which one is the media, who you want to be helping you to communicate this in a very professional manner. You're not panicking. Yes, we're aware of the challenges that have been indicated around this. Our team is investigating, and we will update the public at further notice. So there are some pretty standard terms you can do, because the least thing you want to happen is a crisis happen. You're a small business or you're a larger corporation, you start stress out, the media calling, you're not taking any calls. Your brand narrative starts to be built without your input. So a key part of crisis proofing your brand is to ensure that you are actively engaged in any conversations about your brand should a crisis strike. Trust me, it is far better to say, we're investigating this right now and we'll provide an update later, than for the media to publish something to say up to press time, so-and-so has not given a response. It leaves your customers to start to speculate about your brand and whether you are the reliable, trustworthy brand that they have come to know. You also wanted to have your designated speaker, which I touched on a little bit before. If a crisis hits, who is the person who will issue a statement on behalf of the company? If a press conference needs to be called, does it have to be the CEO? Suppose the CEO is sick. Who is the person who would be designated to speak on behalf of the company? What is the message that you would be sending out to the person as well? And you also want to do ongoing research and update your brand essential toolkit as you go along, because you would not have been able to foresee like a COVID-19 happening. But within your industry, there may be certain trends or certain directions that you can anticipate. And then you can say, okay, well, what happens if this technological shift happens and we're at the back end of it, and then this creates a crisis for us because we're not au fait with what is happening. So you want to be thinking about that. You want to be researching ahead and saying, okay, what if something happens today and I need to be quickly defending my brand, protecting my brand, trying to nurture the relationships that I forge. One thing I'll say as well, in all of this with your brand kit and nurturing that relationship, you also have to think about your internal audiences as well. Don't just focus on sending something to the media and members of your team don't know what's happening. I've seen this happen time and time again. Companies are going through mergers or there are whispers about a sale, etc., an acquisition. Staff members start to panic, they start to leave the work, even if they weren't going to be fired. And so you want to tend to your internal audiences as a part of crisis proofing your brand kit, as well as your external audiences. Importantly, you want to adapt and be flexible. Sometimes it may be that despite all of your efforts, the business may actually go down, or it may go into a complete different direction that you didn't want it to go in. And so in being flexible, you can look at the opportunities to pivot. You can look at parallel opportunities, you can look at partnerships, you can look at collaborations, and so much more to get you to where you want to be. Someone says, thank you. I do have to go, but this was a very helpful session. Okay, thank you so much for that, Sandy. And I am wrapping up. So I will go to key takeaways. If there's anybody at all who wants to say anything in particular that you have heard, is there anything that stood out to you? Again, as I said, the four main parts is one, understanding that your brand is much more than a look and feel. It's several different layers beyond the visibility. It also is very reflective. So you have to go back to say, what are your core values? Why did you go into business? What do you, well, apart from the money, what are some of the things you want to be communicating to the people that you're serving to get them to be on your side, to convert them to your brand champions, and to have them continuously come to you to do business? Two, we also want to be looking at, the integrated approach, and PR falls into that. So I won't even go into the details. I broke it out so I could speak a little bit about it. And, you think about it, that the integrated way really helps you to get best value. You may not have the big budget, but you can test and measure different things. Social media is working for you. Yes, it's nice to have a social media page. People will check if you have a social media page, but is it really connecting with the audiences you're serving? And then you may test something else and say, oh, but I'm getting lots of traction via LinkedIn by doing these sessions, or when I go live, I have a better chance, or based on the nature of my product, when I go into a store and do an in-store promotion, etc., that works well for me. So that's the integrated approach. And then the final point or key takeaway, as I mentioned, is the crisis kit. Joyce is saying, I love the crisis kit. Never thought of it, thank you. So I'm happy to hear that you have learned at least one new thing. And again, as I say, you can start small. Just think through the different things that could possibly go wrong, or think through the things that could go right. If you have some grand announcement to make, something, you went beyond your wildest dreams and you got a massive contract and you want to be communicating this, is there a quick way to do it? It's just worse when it's bad news though, because we tend to panic naturally. So if there are any key takeaways, you can drop that into the chat. And for now, while you're here, I would just say, just stay connected with us at Infinity. You can find us across all the different communication channels. As I mentioned, we serve, actually our vision and mission statement speaks to how we are keen on using communications locally, regionally, and internationally. And we have been looking up to that brand ethos. So if you ever are looking to expand your business within your local markets or across the Caribbean markets, etc., you know where to find us. And these are all our contact details here on screen. In terms of social media, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And I think we will just pull together some key points from this. So if you head over to our social media platforms a bit later today, you should see that. And my offer still stands that if you are interested in our public speaking and media session on the 29th, I'll offer a special for persons who are joining from this presentation. Katerina says, branding shows uniqueness. Indeed, it is about your unique value proposition and your key selling point, because even though people may be within the sector and it's a dime a dozen, what makes you stand out? And ultimately, you'll find we all have a brand story, or companies have a story, we have a motivation. I shared a little bit about my brother's epilepsy situation and wanting to use my voice to speak on his behalf because people so often would have misinterpreted what he said. So all of these little things, you want to be thinking through what is something that can become an emotional hook when you're speaking about your brand that helps people to be connected with you, that you can build mutual ground and further leverage that relationship towards sales. So thank you so much, ladies. I see Claire is there. She's like, time is up. Janice says, thank you, Shanoy. Very informative session. I love the integrated approach. So thank you.
Good stuff, Shanoy. Good stuff. No, I have a pitch session after this, and I'm just, no, allow you to finish. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Thank you so much. So I see the comments are coming in. Thank you so much. Very informative, etc. If there are any last questions before Claire kicks me off, now is your chance to do it. It's now or never. All right. So if not, I will see you over on Infinity platforms, etc. I see Candice from my team sending stuff to people who want to sign up for the training program. And really, thank you. Love the information. So,
Shanoy, and we can share that information with everybody who's on the Zoom, the workshop. So you can go ahead and share it with Kimberly, and we'll just distribute it to all those who attended so that they can sign up if they want to as well.
All right, great. So, and it's done in dual modality. So if you're not based in Jamaica and you want to join as well, we do make our arrangements that on the training day, you feel like you're a part of the room. Joyce is asking a quick question. How can I create my crisis kit? Well, some of the tips I gave you, Joyce, is a starting point. As I say, you start to think about some of the questions, etc. But there are some technicalities. If you need support with that further, you can feel free to, well, I think this call will end, but you can email us hello@infinityimc.com. I see Candice dropped a number there, or just slide into our DMs, as the young people would say, across any of the platforms, and we'd be happy to help you with that. Robin, Shanoy, thank you. The crisis communication piece connected. Can you recommend any courses locally? Wow. Well, the Caribbean School of Media had some crisis communications components part of the program. I will have to check with the program director, but I think many of the media programs should have a crisis section included in it, because it speaks to being prepared for just about every worst case situation. So thanks for that question, Robin. All right, Claire, I think I will now stop and you can just close out today's presentation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Shanoy, for being our facilitator. Certainly the information that has been shared here in this forum, in this tight window, is invaluable. I myself learned so much from it, and I have a background in marketing, but the research part of it though. Yes. So thanks again. Thank you for supporting the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem. Thank you for supporting Branson Centre. And thanks to everyone who have joined us today. We'll certainly send out the Zoom link as well as share information about Shanoy's session that's coming up. So if you want to sign up for that, and be on the lookout, guys, for our next webinar, which is on the 29th, the last Thursday. So join us again, and that will close out our series, our webinar series for this particular quarter. Thank you, Shanoy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, team, for joining us, and have a good one. Bye.
Bye.